Hello, everyone, and welcome to Brightpoint Infotech's podcast. I am Premjit Singh, Marketing Manager at Brightpoint Infotech. And today we are discussing something that thousands of Dynamics GP customers are either already evaluating or need to evaluate very soon, which is moving from Dynamics GP to Dynamics 365 Business Central. But today we are not going to talk only about migration tools, configuration screens, or technical scripts. We are going to discuss something that is actually required before all of this, which is planning. And for that, I have with me my colleague Ankur Arora, who is the Dynamics 365 Business Central Solutions Consultant at Brightpoint Infotech. So, Ankur, welcome to this podcast.
Thanks, Premjit. Great to be here. And I really like the subject because the people here, GP migration, the first question that usually came in the mind is how quickly can you migrate our system? But the better first question should be what exactly should we migrate and why we should migrate.
Exactly. And this is, why GP customers need to start thinking now. And what you just shared is an important distinction, Ankur. And there's obviously another reason this conversation is becoming more urgent, which is because Microsoft has announced that Dynamics GP product enhancements, regularity updates, and technical support will end on December 31st, 2029, with security updates continuing until April 31st, 2031. So, Ankur, just wanted to check with you, should GP customers be worried because of this? What's your take?
Actually, I wouldn't say they should panic, but
Mm,
they absolutely should start planning and thinking
mm,
about it, right? This because this 2029 may sound very far right
mm,
now,
mm.
but ERP decisions doesn't happen overnight. You have
Correct.
got budgeting, you have got requirements gatherings,
Absolutely.
data cleanups, integrations, testing, user trainings, year-end considerations, and sometimes multiple legal entities,
Mm-hmm.
right? So let's say if an organization has been running on GP for more than 10 years, 15 years, or over 20 years, right? So you're not simply moving a software, right? You're dealing with
Mm-hmm.
20 years of business decisions, right? Which is definitely embedded inside that system, right? And that is
Exactly.
where the planning becomes very critical.
Exactly. And so the key message here is don't wait until GP support is ending and basically, have to take action today for, what are your plans for the future ERP and what it should look like. So,
Exactly.
one thing I've noticed, Ankur, that companies often say, we want exactly what we have in GP. It is just in the cloud. It should just be in the cloud, a SaaS option. So, do you think, that approach is right?
Usually it's not a right approach, but that's probably one of the biggest mistake that an organization
Exactly.
can do, right? Because, uh, I mean, it's like, we should always look for much efficient and,
Mm.
much productive solutions and not exactly, what we have today, right? That is basically the idea behind implementing any system,
Right.
right? So let's imagine, like, if you have been living in a house for 20 years, right?
Mm.
And over the years you have, let's say, added shelves, right? You've added some temporary partitions onto that, right? And let's say you have added some extension cords, right? So and you have definitely added lot many workarounds here and there, right?
Right, right,
So let's say now you are now basically building a brand new house, right? So would you like to tell the architect that please recreate every extension cord, right? Please recreate, let's say, every temporary partition as it is? Probably not, right? So ERP migration is the same, right?
mm.
You
Mm.
want to ask, why did we customize GP in the first place, right? Is that customization really necessary? Maybe Business Central already handles that, let's say, that requirement maybe either differently or let's say a natively, maybe a
Right.
native feature in Business Central would have such capability.
Right. So, Ankur, that's a great way of putting it. So, the key message is don't migrate your technical debt.
Exactly.
Right, right. So, basically modernization should be the approach. And
Right.
Ankur, let's start with the first phase. Where should an organization begin, according to you?
So basically, it should begin at a stakeholder alignment level,
Mm.
right? And ERP migration cannot be, first of all, viewed as an IT only project, right?
Right.
You need finance people, you need operations people, supply chain people, wherever applicable, right? You need IT people,
Mm.
and definitely the executive leadership advisors, right? Before, let's say, you implement a system, right? Let me give you a very good example, because that is what, when I was implementing for a project, right? So we
Mm.
just met for, I mean, definitely a similar sort of the project, when
Right.
actually we went for this migration activity. So I met a CEO there, right? And then we just try to get their inputs about the system, right? So
Mm-hmm.
CE tells us that the GP works reasonably well,
Mm-hmm.
right? We mainly need a better financial reporting solution. That's it, right? So then after that, we basically met to the operations team,
Mm-hmm.
right? They tell us that they actually, like they just told us that every morning they are basically exporting all the inventory information out to the Excel,
Mm.
right? So, and GP doesn't give their warehouse team the visibility that they need,
Right.
right?
Right.
And after
Understand.
that, we go and met the sales team, right?
Sales.
What sales team said that they actually need to send out the emails, like the status of the email, the status of the orders,
Yeah.
right? And the email those orders manually, right? So
That-
basically, after that, because they didn't know what is actually happening on the fulfillment side of things, right? So suddenly, this is not actually a finance system upgrade anymore. It's basically, you can say that it's an order to cash and operational visibility transformation, right? So it's just not only looking the things only from the one side of the things, but yes, we actually need to see the entire picture.
Right, right. So the key thing is here. So, for example, if you meet or interview only the finance people, you will only understand one part of the business. So it is very, very important that you meet, different stakeholders from different business processes.
Correct. And before discussing the software, I like organization to identify at least
Mm.
3 to 5 measurable business outcomes, right?
Mm.
For example, let's say, if basically an organization would like to reduce the manual reconciliation, right? That can be one of them, because definitely it is very important, so that, whatever manual activities we can just, for example, eliminate out of our business processes, right? So that
Mhm.
everything should be in the system,
Mm.
right? So they might be thinking to, let's say, shorten their month-end close
Mm.
processes, right, to make it more effective, right? And they might be looking at for improving their inventory visibility, or
Very good.
let's say they would like to reduce the dependency on the Excel spreadsheets, right? Or let's say management would also like to get some real-time management reporting,
Yeah.
right? And so basically, those outcomes should be the objective of the migration, I would say, right?
Absolutely. Absolutely. That's
Yeah.
very nicely put across, Ankur. Uh, so another question, Ankur, is then when the current system assessment, when a company decides to do that, so, what are you looking for here when
Basically,
when you do the
yeah, yeah.
system assessment, or the when you go for the meeting, what basically information that you look for from the customer?
Yeah, basically, when we go for a meeting with the customer, right, exactly what we are looking for is, let's say, there are definitely multiple modules inside the GP
Mm.
system, right? So we, first of all, we would like to see, like, let's say, what GP modules are actually being used, right?
Mhm.
What customizations currently exist, right?
Very important, yeah.
So let's say, yeah, yeah, and also what third-party ISVs are currently installed in their environment, right? So let's say what integrations are currently connected,
Mm.
right? Let's say which reports are critical, right? And very importantly, what happens outside
Mm.
Great Plains system? Because definitely whatever is happening currently outside the system, basically our my objective should going to be that we actually need to make it inside the system, right? It
Absolutely.
can be a native function, or definitely we need to just plan for that, right? As part of that migration activity, right? Because sometimes the most important ERP processes are actually happening in an Excel, or let's say in an
Mhm.
email, or sometimes sometimes sitting under somewhere desktop folder,
Yeah,
right?
yeah, yeah.
So
True, true, true.
that is something
Yeah.
which we should focus more, basically.
Exactly. Thank you for those,
Yeah.
questions. I'm sure, the listeners who would be hearing this podcast, you're making a note of it, what information they need to have before they, go in for the assessment of migration. So, Ankur, if you can, give us an industry-specific example, that would be really helpful.
Yeah, sure. Basically, I would like to give an example. Actually, I went for a client for manufacturing industry, right?
Mm-hmm.
So they are been on GP for more than 15 years,
Mm-hmm.
right? And basically, maybe I can just tell their example. They have around six customizations, right?
Okay.
But basically, while doing the discovery, we found that currently they are doing their production planning outside of the system, which is
Oh,
basically manually being used in Excel
oh,
spreadsheets,
okay.
right? Their purchase approvals are also handled over the email only, right?
Okay.
And without any SLAs being there, right? And also, their quality data is basically stored outside the system, and basically their managers are actually receiving the spreadsheet manually over Excel, definitely, let's say on every Monday, right?
Okay.
and and what is happening behind that is that the basically the staff is actually doing spending hours of hours to basically just reconciling the data between one
Mm.
and the other system, right? So I would say in that case that technically GP may be running fine, but operationally the organization has built an ecosystem of workarounds around it, right?
Understood. Understood. So, which simply, means that moving the database doesn't solve the business problem, right?
Exactly.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
Great. So, Ankur, thank you again for this sharing this, this use case of a manufacturing company. Now, let's talk about the data, because I've heard this in many conversations, that that we have 15 years of GP history, and we want everything migrated. So, based on your experience, is this the right approach? Or, what would be your response if, if you come across these kind of questions from a customer?
Definitely, my response is no, right?
Mhm.
Because first of all, I would
Why?
like to ask the question that why?
Yeah.
Okay, because not because we can't migrate data, right?
Mm,
Microsoft provides us online migration tools for
mm,
supporting dynamic GP environment to
mm,
basically transfer the data to the Business Central online environments,
mm, mm.
right? But technically possible doesn't automatically means strategically sensible, right?
Absolutely.
So let's say you have 15 years of transaction history, right?
Mm-hmm.
Then ask yourself, how often does anyone look at that transaction? Let's say even the transaction, let's say, which is 7 years old or
Mm,
8 years old, right? Or even I would say 6 years old, right? Could I would say that could definitely they can ask that question to themselves, right? Again, that is their thought that how they would like to, let's say, deal about that. But we just need to ask it ourselves that could older information remain available through an archive or a reporting database, right? Or do you really need inactive vendors? Do you really need, let's say, old customers? Do you really need
mm,
discontinued items,
mm.
right? Do you really need the test records, right? Do you want to duplicate master data? The answer is no, right? So migration is actually a fantastic opportunity to clean your data, right? And then definitely if the data is clean, then definitely the productivity of the employee is much better than earlier.
Absolutely. That's a very nice way of putting it, that, it is actually a good opportunity to clean up your data. And and sometimes, less data can actually produce better migration.
Right. Absolutely. And I would rather migrate 5 years of clean, trusted information, right, than 15
Mhm.
years of the clutter simply because it exists. So it doesn't mean that, we should migrate it, right? So the exact decision basically varies by organization's regulatory
Mm.
audit and reporting requirements, of course.
Right, right, right. Okay, so let's talk about Ankur, about the fit gap analysis. So So when you go for a customer meeting, do you ask the organization, or what I'm trying to ask is, what's the wrong question companies ask, when it comes to fit gap analysis?
Yeah, so that happened to me always all the time,
Uh-huh.
right? The wrong question is that how do we make Business Central behave exactly like GP, right? Because definitely we don't want them to,
Yeah,
exactly work like GP. We would definitely would like to make it better than GP, right?
absolutely.
So the better question is how should this process work in the future, right? So that, they
Mm-hmm.
should set up their expectation, we should set our expectations, right?
Right, right.
So basically what Business Central does is that Business Central connects finance, sales, service, and operations, right?
Mm-hmm.
And Microsoft has built it around a border cloud ecosystem. So Microsoft is basically currently trusted by more than 50,000 companies, right?
Right,
And Power BI can also directly work with Business Central data to basically create the
right.
dashboards,
That's a good
drill into
advantage. Yeah.
information. Yeah, yeah. And actually, the good thing is that when you will going to learn about it, you can also build your own report. It's just a kind of a drag and drop kind of a thing,
Right.
right? So definitely they can drill into information, combine information from multiple business central companies, right? So I mean, the another example is that let's say if the CEO of an organization is let's say looking at a 15 tabs Excel workbook report every
Mm-hmm.
month, right? Let's say from their existing system, let's say from the Great Plains system, right?
Mm-hmm.
So instead of saying let's recreate those 15 tabs, right? So let's try to see that what actually that CEO is basically making the decision out of that report, right?
Mm-hmm.
Because we need to see what would be the better way of putting that report instead of creating those 15 tabs. Maybe you can let's say do it in 5 tabs or 6 tabs to make it more precise and summarized,
Correct,
right?
correct.
Just try to understand the objective, right? Maybe
Mm-hmm.
maybe the need can be let's say revenue versus budget
Mm-hmm.
positions, right? Cash positions, let's say receivables aging, or maybe looking at a gross margin by business units, right? Or it can be, let's say, profitability by different
Mm-hmm.
dimensions,
Correct.
right? And this could completely change how the reporting solution is designed.
Absolutely, completely agree. And that is a very, very
Yeah.
important distinction, Ankur.
Yes, exactly. So I would say don't migrate the report, migrate the decisions those report supports.
Oh, yes, absolutely. I agree with that.
Yes.
Let's talk about customizations, Ankur. What happens to all the GP customizations? This is probably one of the areas customers, kind of worry about. So what do you have to, share about this?
So, and it's where, the disciplined planning can save a lot of
Oh,
lot
yes.
of
Oh,
money,
yes. Oh,
right?
yes.
So for every customizations, right, I would say put it into one of the four buckets, right?
Mm-hmm.
One is basically retain, right? So second is the replace, right? The third is redesign, and the fourth is retire. So we'll call it as a 4R model, right?
Yeah.
You always need to use that 4R model to decide whether you want to retain it or replace it or redesign it or retire it. I'll give you an example.
Mm-hmm.
Let's imagine GP has a customization written 8 years ago, right?
Uh-huh.
For the purchasing approval. So
Mm.
before, let's say you rebuild that customization, ask, right? Can Business Central plus Power Automate handles that requirement today? Because nowadays there are a lot many features in Power Automate, right? It's actually a low code mechanism
Mm-hmm.
that you can use, right? So you can also use Power Automate along with Business Central,
Right.
or you just need to think that you may don't need that. Maybe the process is changed, right? There is a
Mm-hmm.
revised process which might be much better than the earlier process, right?
Right, right.
So let's say another customization may exist because GP couldn't capture, let's say, certain dimensions the way the business wanted, right?
Mm.
So let's say Business Central may provide a different approach, right? It might be possible that that Business Central might exist as a native function, or we may need to deal that differently, right? So that can also be part of that planning. So I would say don't automatically take a 20,000 old customization because it was there in GP, right? And let's just spend another $20,000 just rebuilding that customization in basically when you're doing a migration from GP to BC. I would
Mm-hmm.
say challenge it first.
Absolutely, absolutely right.
Yeah.
Well said, well said. Uh, So, Ankur, I believe that's where the ROI starts, appearing before the implementation even begins.
Exactly. Every
Mm,
customization you can safely retire is one less thing to develop,
mm,
one less thing to test, one less thing to maintain, and one less thing to upgrade.
right, right, right.
Yes.
Okay. So, Ankur, one last and final question is more, related to the strategy. So, according to you, should it be a big bang migration or a phased migration? So, does it depend upon the what is the size of the customer? What are their plans? What's your take on this?
Yeah, definitely. First of all, there is no universal answer to that,
Mm,
right? So, I mean, as you correctly said, that is based on the size of the client, how it
mm,
will going to be dealt with, right? So, definitely for a relatively straightforward organization, we may go
mm,
with the big bang approach, right? Because it will going to make more sense.
mm,
Because definitely it will going to be a simple with the simpler operations being one legal entity, right? Or with some sort of limited integrations,
mm,
right? So, but yes, if you will talk about a multi-company environment, let's say with warehousing or manufacturing functions being there, right, or a payroll functions, e-commerce
mm,
integrations, right, banking integration, complex reporting, a phase strategy is much better because it may going to definitely going to reduce the operational risk which is involved in the implementation, right? So I would say the decision should come after discovery and not before that.
mm, mm.
So
Okay.
you should choose the migration. You should not choose the migration approach because it is actually suggested by your partner, right? You
Mm-hmm.
basically choose it on the basis of the business complexity, right? Risk and organizational readiness, right? So we always do discovery meetings with the client as part of our activities, right?
Absolutely.
And then definitely we would help the clients to basically choose their like whether it is going to be big bang or it is actually a phased approach.
Absolutely, I agree, with what you said. It has to be, chosen based on the business complexity, risk, and, what is the organization overall readiness of the organization. I totally agree with that.
Right.
And Ankur, let's leave our listeners, with something very practical. Uh, if I'm a CFO, controller, or IT director, using GP today, what three questions should I ask my organization tomorrow morning?
I'd ask the number one, what are the biggest limitations and workaround in our current GP environment, right?
Mm-hmm.
That definitely we would like not to appear in future, right? In our new system, right? Which processes do we want to improve rather than simply migrate, right?
Yeah.
And definitely third, but a very important question, right?
Mm.
What data customizations and integrations do we genuinely need in our future environment,
Yeah.
right?
Uh,
If you answer, right, let's say those three questions clearly, right, then you have already started your migration, I would say.
yeah. I would add one more, which is don't make your, 2029 your migration deadline. Make it your planning horizon.
Hmm.
Because the objective isn't just, to basically get off GP. The objective is to build an ERP platform capable of supporting the next stage of your business growth. And that's really where, what we wanted to highlight today is that at Brightpoint Infotech, we work with organizations evaluating their journey from Dynamics GP to Business Central. And one of the best places to begin is with a structured GP to BC readiness assessment. And that's where our team can help you. You can visit our website at www.brightpointinfotech.com, or even write us at info@brightpointinfotech.com. And Ankur, it was a pleasure, having this discussion with you. Great share of knowledge, and thank you once again.